Well, welcome. Today we have a very special guest, Max McLean. He's an award-winning actor and founder of the artistic group in New York City, the Fellowship for Performing Arts. Max adapted for the stage the Screwtape letters, C.S. Lewis Onstage, The Most Reluctant Convert, The Great Divorce, Genesis. As an actor, he's won numerous awards. He's been featured in the Washington Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, many more. Max, we are excited about this new movie that you have on C.S. Lewis. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, David.
Well, Max, I feel like that I've known you for the years because of your voice. When I got on Fire for the Lord, I remember listening to the audio Bible and hearing you, cite scripture. And as I was on my walks, I would listen to your voice. And I believe I heard you at Presswind Baptist back in way back in like 2002 in Dallas, Texas. And then you were on stage talking about, I think I heard you do the Screwtape letters in Dallas around 2012, and then the Most Reluctant Convert, I think about 2017. So I'm excited, and I've seen this movie, and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about why you decided to go to the screen to film this movie about C.S. Lewis.
Sure. The movie began as a stage play, and you said you saw the stage play in Dallas in 2017. I think it originated in 2016. It was premiered in Washington, D.C. in 2016, and then ran in New York for 15 weeks in 2017. Then we did a tour, and Dallas was one of the first places we toured, and
Wow.
It was a terrific time in Dallas, and we were very busy with this play in 2018 and 2019, and we're going to continue to be busy in 2020. But in the fall of 2019, I reached out to Norman Stone, an old friend of mine, and we had talked about, he's a filmmaker and a very strong Christian, and I'm a theater maker and a strong Christian. And so I reached out to him and sent him our script and said, what do you think of this script? Because he's done some C.S. Lewis stuff in the past. And so he really liked the script. We started talking about what it would take to do it. And we saw this as a 2022, 2023 project. This is 2 or 3 years ago. And then the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and everything we were doing shut down.
Wow.
Do you remember 15 days to flatten the curve? Remember that? And
Yeah.
I was thinking, well, what am I going to do for the next 2 weeks?
Wow.
And 2 weeks became, for us, 17 months. We were shut down, had no theatrical presentations. We had the Screwtape. Prior to that, we had the Screwtape letters on the road. We had an adaptation of C.S. Lewis, The Great Divorce, on the road. Most Reluctant Convert was on the road.
Wow.
And we had a modern adaptation of Paradise Lost here in New York. So we were really busy. And then all of a sudden, it just stopped. It was March 12th.
Wow.
It was over. Everything was shut down and didn't open again for us until August of 2021. And in the beginning, we did think it was short. But then when it came to the point that we realized it was going to be a long-term shutdown, we said, well, what are we going to do? And so Norman pointed out to me that the British film industry, which had been closed since March, was going to reopen in August.
Wow.
Under very strict guidelines. And we'd already been talking about making the film, but again, we didn't see it as anytime soon. And he said that if we move quickly, he could get a good crew together, a good cast, but we really needed to jump on it because nobody had worked since March. And I asked him to confirm that and to confirm the locations that we needed in Oxford, in and around Oxford, to do the C.S. Lewis movie, and got the funding to put it in the can. And on August 31st, 2020, I got on a plane as big as Air Force One with fewer people on it.
Wow.
And flew from New York to London. Quarantine for 2 weeks, began shooting right after that. We finished our shoot in October of 2020.
Wow.
Post-production.
You moved quickly.
Yeah, post-production was finished in March. and we opened in November of 2021.
Wow, that is fascinating. So it was actually probably the pandemic that allowed your schedule. Everything was closing down, but you jumped on this, and your producer, Norman Stone, saw an opportunity, and that's fascinating that you were able to go. Tell us about some of the places that you shot there. It looked like you were at Oxford and
Yeah.
some of the original, like in the beginning, you're in that pub when you walk in there. Tell us about some of those
Yeah.
places where you filmed.
So we wanted to be authentic. So everything was shot in and around Oxford. We had 18 different locations, 18 or 20 different locations. We had 15 actors, 190 extras, 270 costumes. It was a pretty big deal. We shot at Lewis's home. We couldn't shoot at the Bird and Baby, the Eagle and Child, because that was closed. So we shot that scene at the White Horse Inn right in downtown. We were in all the major buildings, Magdalen College, where Lewis taught, Addison's Walk, where he was converted or had that very famous conversation with J.R.R. Tolkien that led to his conversion. Yeah, it was, and it was beautifully shot. I just thought the film really captured Oxford. It's almost, if anything, it's almost like a tourist video for Oxford, England.
It is. I was just telling my wife Michelle, we watched it in theater with my mother-in-law, Kelly Kohlberg. I think you've met her before, and David. And we saw it opening night. We loved it, and then we rented it again, and we were just saying, I want to go to Oxford because the film is just so beautiful. And but maybe I like the opening because it shows you as Max, and then kind of getting the stage set up, and then all of a sudden you become C.S. Lewis. And you start quoting, and most of this is from Surprised by Joy, but that opening part, that's from another part of Lewis.
Yes, it is. About the film really follows the structure of the film is Lewis is living in his memories and recounting as an older man, looking back on his younger life. And we have three people playing Lewis. We have Lewis as a boy, Lewis as a young man, and me, the elder Lewis, looking back on his life. And in the very first scene, Lewis is talking about his atheism, and that's taken from his book, The Problem of Pain, where he begins, when I was an atheist, if you'd asked me, why do you not believe in God? I would have answered, look at the universe we live in. And it gives a very robust response to the atheistic worldview. And we don't really want to create any straw men. We want to create steel men, because Lewis was a vigorous debunker of Christianity.
Yes.
And he earned that, because he lost his mother to cancer when she was 9. When he was 9, he prayed for her, but realized prayer didn't work because she didn't come back. He had a terrible relationship with his father, and that Lewis regretted that most of his life. He was in World War I, the Great War, the trenches, saw the butchery of trench warfare, which he called the hell where youth and laughter go. And he came to the conclusion, either there's no God behind the universe, a God indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God. And so that was where he began his spiritual journey, from, I think, a very hard-boiled atheist. And then what the play does over a period of time, it breaks down various aspects of how he moved from that atheistic position to becoming, as Walter Hooper said, he said the most reluctant convert in all of England, and Walter Hooper described Lewis as the most thoroughly converted man he'd ever met.
Wow. I thought it was a powerful scene at the beginning when you're talking as the older C.S. Lewis, you're narrating, and then it shows a picture of C.S. Lewis as a little boy and the struggles with his father, but also when his mother dies, and then the lights go dark. and you begin narrating and talking and just citing C.S. Lewis. This film is master. When I first read Surprised by Joy, it was hard for me. I mean, I just struggling to understand it. And after watching the film, I went back and I reread Surprised by Joy again and just enjoyed it, and made so much more sense to me after watching the film. What went into deciding the parts of because there's some parts in the book that are a challenge to read, because Lewis in his, he's so knowledgeable of all these books that I haven't heard of, and he's citing all these things. What made you decide, and how did that come about, deciding the script, and what parts to put into this movie?
Yeah, I mean, that's very subjective on my part. I think somebody else who had the same vision might pick different parts. But one of the things I did do, I started this project originally around 2011. I just finished this, probably 2012, 13 maybe. I just finished doing the Screwtape letters in New York. We ran for 9 months in New York. It was a very successful production, began touring it. And so what do I want to do next? And part of it was Lewis always refers back to his conversion in his writings. In Screwtape letters, he's talking about how in terms of spiritual warfare, how the enemy of our soul would turn him away from the light. And in The Great Divorce, he would talk about how we resist the Holy Spirit. Those are the two sides of the coin. But in both cases, it's spiritual warfare, powers and principalities. And Lewis saw the conversion as an eternal struggle. And so because he writes so much about that, I wanted to go to his story himself, The Surprised by Joy, which tells that. And what I ended up doing was transcribing the whole book. Wow. I just wanted to think his thoughts after him, and kind of understand, why did he go here instead of here? And then I got his syntax. I got the way he, the discipline of his writing. Mm-hmm. I got a sense of humor, the way he just was very self-deprecating, the way he turns phrases, turns words. So I got all that. And then it was more of a, writing is more of an editing process. It's how much can people understand in one take. That was part of it. There's parts of it I absolutely loved, wanted to tell, but realized it just wasn't going to land. So yeah. It's a long process of trial and error. Doing the stage play really helped, because I was able to play it for audiences for several years before I went on stage.
What draws you to C.S. Lewis? What first drew you? Was it, do you see some of yourself in C.S. Lewis? What were some of the things that drew you to Lewis?
Well, I'm nowhere near as smart as he is. I mean, I like, one of the things that's so much fun about playing him is it's wonderful to play somebody that smart for 90 minutes, and to be able to say those words. I don't talk like that, but I love doing that. It's like I play a doctor on TV. It feels a little bit like that. Lewis does challenge your assumptions. That's one thing that's very, very important that I love about Lewis. He read everything from the Greeks to the moderns. He had a steel-trap mind which could remember everything he read and was able to articulate it in extraordinary prose and speech. And he did it all from a Christian worldview. So he helps me, he guides me in a deeper understanding, a more beautiful understanding of my faith. He draws pictures of the faith that is so alluring, and I just can't thank him enough for what he's done for me and through me.
Wow, that's fantastic. And you also mentioned how he uses humor, and one of the parts that I found funny is, he has this conflict with his father, but the actor, as you're narrating it as the older C.S. Lewis, and it shows the little boy actor, the flashbacks, and the actor for the father, great acting, that whole stage, just the humor as his father was this lawyer who gave these long speeches. And tell us a little bit about that scene, because I found that that was a pretty funny scene.
I love that scene. It's in his biography, of course, his memoirs. He said that Lewis described his father as uh, a public prosecutor. He was a public prosecutor long before he had become a father. Words came to him and intoxicated him as they came. So he
Yeah.
says, what happens? A small boy who left the bathroom in a pickle found himself attacked like Cicero on Catiline, simile on simile, rhetorical question on rhetorical question, and the boys just had to take it,
Yeah.
and filled their minds with these incredible images. He says, in the wilderness of words emerged ideas I took literally, that my father's ruin was fast approaching, that he would board up the house and send us off to and keep us in school all year round, that I would be sent off to the colonies to end in misery the career of crime in which I had already embarked. This is the kind of language he had to endure.
Yeah.
And it went on and on and on. And at one point, his father was big on pauses, and his brother thought, as he said, the denunciation to have ended, and he picked up his book and resumed reading, and his father just exploded.
That was hilarious. That was one of the funniest scenes I thought in the movie, and I just love hearing you say that. And even though with this struggle with his father, it seems that his dad left him books. I mean, it shows his house just filled with books.
Yeah.
And from a very early age, his father still had an impact on him.
His father and his mother, a very bookish family. His mother was the foundation of the family. And the father was just way too emotional, way too unpredictable. And it made Lewis very skeptical of emotions all his life.
Wow. One of my favorite parts in the movie, there's several parts that just stand out. One of my scenes that I really like, the creativity, is you as the older C.S. Lewis walking at Oxford at the moment that Lewis, now at Oxford as I guess a college student, he's talking to Barfield, and Barfield is really questioning the materialism that Lewis held so deeply, and he begins asking questions that really shocked the Lewis with the inconsistencies. Tell us a little bit about that scene.
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier, that Lewis thought that either there was no God behind the universe, a God who's indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God. And behind that was Lewis indicated that his notion, the notion that he had, was the premise of it was that the whole universe was so cruel and unjust. Right. That was his premise, because of the experiences he had. But then he asked the question, and his friends helped him ask the question. He says, well, where did he get this notion of cruel and unjust? Right? I call a line crooked because I have some idea of a straight line.
Yes.
What am I comparing the universe with when I called it cruel and unjust? And so that was some of the help that his friends had. Now, in that Barfield scene, he takes a little different approach, and he indicates that if you're truly a materialist, then mind, reason, imagination, consciousness is merely atoms colliding in skulls.
Yes.
You don't think a thought because it's true, only because blind nature forces you to think it. You never do an act because it's right, only because blind nature forces you to do it. And in the way Barfield says in the movie, he says, if my clearest reason tells me that my mind is nothing more than the accidental result of atoms colliding in skulls,
yes,
there must be some mistake. How could I trust my mind when it tells me that my most profound thought is merely a mental pattern resulting from heredity and physics? And that got Lewis's attention out of materialism. It didn't make him a Christian. What it did, it really made him a pantheist. But that was the first step in Lewis's journey to first theism, and theism, theism first in the sense of the God of the philosophers, is the most unobjectionable theory,
Mhm.
to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, almost like the God of Moses before the burning bush. I mean, when I finally, that whole scene, I gave in and accepted that God is God, perhaps the most dejected, reluctant convert in all England. That was to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That was to the God of the burning bush of Moses. But it was not the Christian God. So, and for most of us Christians, we think of theism as a very soft word. But to Lewis, and to, he says his religion was like that of the Jews, to a devout Jew, you're talking to the God of the universe. But what Lewis couldn't understand at that point was, he said that the God that I believed in was not human, meaning he was not Jesus. Uh, uh, he had no understanding how the life and death of someone else, whoever he was 2,000 years ago, could help us here and now. He said, I don't get that. A lot of people don't get that, right?
Yes.
Right. But and the way Tolkien explained to Lewis in Addison's Walk, which I think is a very important part of the movie, is that when you meet a God, now I don't think this will work for everybody. It certainly worked for Lewis, though.
Yes.
But when you meet a God sacrificing himself in a pagan story, when we go see movies, Marvel movies or
Right.
Spider-Man movies, those are all mythological characters, which are based on mythological gods,
Yes.
superheroes. That's all of that is. That's pagan worship. So it's a rebirth of that.
Yes.
And Lewis says that, and you love those stories, and we all love those stories because it's good and evil, and it's at the very deepest archetypes of our imagination. And Lewis says, Tolkien said to Lewis, "You love those stories of Dionysus, Baldur's, stories of dying gods. Whenever you meet it anywhere, and you're very moved by them, except when you meet it in the Gospels."
Yes.
And it's because he had this stained glass mirror window idea of the Gospels. And what that little conversation did for C.S. Lewis, it made him go back to the Bible, and he started reading it differently. And then he came to the conclusion of who Jesus is, and he was kind of shocked by it. I am, before Abraham was, I am. I'm going to come back to judge the world. I've created the universe. I mean, lunacy stuff, unless he wasn't. And so Lewis's steel trap dialectic wouldn't let him off the hook.
Yes.
And that's what makes his conversion so compelling.
And this whole idea about a true myth that that Tolkien challenged him on that famous walk, and earlier a former student that is mentioned in the movie who was an atheist who said, I think it really did happen one time, and it shocked Lewis. But this idea of true myth, I know that is kind of like come back lately. I heard, William Lane Craig has a new book on defending the historical Adam and how do we reconcile this historically. He references Lewis with myth, and then Jordan Peterson, on his podcast. So people are wondering, where is he moving in this journey? And he references Lewis, that this story that's kind of planted in people's heart of dying and rising gods, it really did happen. I like in the movie when they're sitting at the table with Tolkien and I forgot the other person who's
Dyson, Hugo
okay.
Dyson. Yes.
And you kind of put in parts of Mere Christianity, the whole. Maybe you could,
yeah.
Yes, maybe you could reference that scene a little bit.
Well, it was after Addison's Walk in the movie, actually, and they're sitting back, and he said, and he basically said what we just did talking about is can a great moral teacher say these kinds of things?
Yes.
because people say, I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher. It lets them off the hook a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It says, I think he was a terrific guy, but it says, well, how do you square some of the terrific things he says, like before Abraham was, I am. He was at the beginning with the creation of the universe. He's coming back to judge the living and the dead. All of these sorts of things. That's what got him crucified.
Yeah.
A great moral teacher might say, this is the truth about the universe, therefore this is how you should live. This guy says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No one gets to ultimate reality except through me.
Yes.
And I go, whoa, dude, what are you going to do with that? And the Jews said, we're not having it. We're just not having it, because they understood, the Jews were the one people who knew there was only one God. They knew that. And who's going to start a myth amongst the one people where we're absolutely convinced that there is but one God, there cannot be another? So all about this is very strong stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, the challenge we have today is truth claims are a power play. So it's, we have so much to overcome. Just the correspondence reality of truth is no longer accepted. So these kinds of arguments, they still work, because you can't live your life anyway but corresponding to reality. So, but it's still academically, it's like dismissed in view of really postmodern nonsense.
Yeah.
But that's just, to me, it's a way of getting around the reality of what Lewis is trying to say.
Well, Max, this is a wonderful movie. What would you tell the audience here, the best place to watch the movie? I think I went to your website.
The movie is the only place you can see the movie is at the C.S. Lewis movie website, cslewismovie.com. It is going to be available much wider. We're trying to work out all the details of that. It will be available much wider in DVD, Blu-ray, and Amazon and iTunes and all that. But that probably won't happen until Easter. So if you want to see it, now, go to cslewismovie.com, cslewismovie.com, and thank you for letting me talk about. I love talking about the movie.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, Max, it's just been such an honor. Maybe in closing, could you give us maybe just a little C.S. Lewis impersonation? Just cite a little portion of C.S. Lewis for us.
Well, one of the most memorable lines in the play is he says, "I remember very well when, but hardly how, the final step was taken. I was being driven by my brother Warney to Whipsnade Zoo in the sidecar of a motorcycle one sunny morning in the autumn of 1931. When we set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. When we reached the zoo, I did."
Wow, that was great.
Yeah,
well,
it's very simple there, but there was a long journey to get there.
It sure was. Well, I love that line there at the end of the movie. Very powerful. Max, thank you so much for joining us today.
Really enjoyed it, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.